To any guys whose wife or significant other had a baby that clearly wasn't yours, what's your story? I'm now in my 50s. Back in my 20s, I was really desperate and dated a woman who was younger than me. About 9 months into our relationship, I went away to another state for a weekend trip. Came back and found out that she had given birth to a child. I was perplexed because she didn't seem pregnant and no one around us knew she was pregnant. She even said that she didn't know that she was pregnant. I'm black, the woman was white, and the kid was powder white. But I do have white in my family. I didn't believe the kid was mine because number 1, I would have had to impregnate her in the first month. Number 2, she looks nothing like me. And number 3, she's too light to have my genes. My mom convinces me that this has to be my kid because the woman says it is and that I have a mixed background. I want to believe it because not believing it means some other guy's the dad, but my rational side says there's no way she's mine. So we move in and eventually get married. The relationship doesn't last and we separate. I decide that I have to find out the truth, even though I know it. I get some money together and get a DNA test. Sure enough, I'm 99% excluded. I show the results to the mother and she says I'm wrong and the test is wrong, that I just don't want to be a dad. I tell her that I do, that I'm done paying child support. However, I give her the option to pay for another DNA test or go through the courts. She declined. The mystery about the pregnancy is making me wonder if she was even the mother. Story 2. I'm the result of this. Family totally messed up. Had a brother who passed away from an illness. No, I'm sorry, please. I honestly barely remember him. He was always sickly and we never really had a normal sibling relationship. I feel like I functionally grew up an only child. Both parents white. Mom, sandy blonde hair, pale skin, bluish eyes. Dad, dark curly hair, medium skin tone, brown eyes. Bro looked like dad and I looked like mom. So my parents divorced when I was in middle school. They had one of those informal, let's just see if we can work things out talks to see if they needed an actual hearing. For whatever reason, I was there. I thought it was awesome at the time and felt so mature, but who in the world lets a middle schooler in on this? So they're trying to hash out child support. Mom looks at dad and says, I just want you out of my life, Mel. I don't need or want anything from you. She isn't yours. Cue paternity test. Turns out she was right. I wasn't his. He called her and me names and that was that. I had no dad anymore. Not that he was much of one in the first place. So who's my father? I have one strong suspicion. She had a male friend who would come over and draw with me and play ball with me and stuff like that. He was Italian, so dark hair and olive skin, which I most definitely am not, but his youngest son is blonde and light-eyed, like me. I looked him up last year and was going to say something like, look, whatever happened, I don't care. I just want my medical history. Turns out he passed away 2 years ago. I thought about contacting one of his sons, but that seems like bad form. His adult kids don't need to be mixed up in the possible product of his dad's affair. Story 3. Not my baby, but my brother's. When I was in high school, my older brother was having a second child with his longtime girlfriend. One day after school, I went over to their house to hang out with him, and a guy I went to school with who was friends with my brother and the girl started going into labor. So everyone helped load her into the cab of his truck and speed off to the hospital. I live in rural Oklahoma at the time, so the hospital where babies are born is a little over an hour away. Now I'm in the bed of the truck along with a friend speeding down this 2-lane highway to get this girl to the hospital before the baby comes out. Well, we make it on time, and they take her back into the delivery room to have the baby. A few hours pass, and my dad, mom, and 3 other siblings show up along with my grandmother. We wait around, and about 6 hours after arriving, the baby pops out. So when we were given the all clear, we all rushed in to see the baby. The mother is laying on the bed, beaming, saying that she loves my brother and she's so glad that they had another little boy, etc., etc. Well, the nurse walks in, pushing the baby in his little crib, and bam! It dawns on all of us. The baby is half black, and we recognize who the dad is. The friend who was there with us, standing in the room with this look on his face. My entire family, along with my brother, walk out of the hospital and just leave the mom and friend there together at the hospital. Apparently, while my brother was locked up in county jail, the friend offered the woman intimacy for some substance, and had been doing it for a while. The guy never did step up and take care of the little boy. My brother eventually got sent to prison for related offenses, and my parents took in the 2 boys for a long time and made the mother jump through the CPS hoops to get them back. Now she's a ranking member of the Oklahoma Department of Corrections in a fairly large prison. That was about 9 years ago, and I haven't seen them in about 7 years. But I also did not live in Oklahoma anymore. I miss them kids. Story 4. This will get buried, but it's a weird story. My high school boyfriend's family were trashy. That's putting it lightly. Anyway, his sister got married at an early age and started trying to have kids. She finally had one in August, and by the end of September, was pregnant again. So I go off to college about the time she births the second one that next summer. 8 weeks later, she's pregnant again. This is where I should mention her husband's genes are strong. All 4 of his kids look exactly alike, 2 from a previous relationship. After she gave birth to number 3, I came home from college for break and went to visit her. She brings out the baby in a blanket and puts him in my arms and throws it back and says, Look at him. I was slightly confused until I realized. She says, looks nothing like him, huh? Kind of nodded, bewildered. She goes on to explain that she was angry he wanted her to keep shucking out kids, so to prove a point, she cheated. And had one that wasn't his that he'd have to look at his whole life. They named all his kids with an M, and she didn't with this one, too. All I could think of was how messed up that kid was going to be as I sat and looked at his innocent little face. That was 15 years ago. They're still married and have 2 more M kids. Poor Jay in the middle with his blonde hair and blue eyes. I wonder if he knows. Story 5. I dated a girl for some time. When my ex came back around, I thought we were back together, so I broke it off with the girl I had been dating. Well, needless to say, I never got back with my ex. Let me also mention, at this time, I'm a single parent who had raised a well-adjusted daughter for 14 years and had my own company and doing fairly well for myself. Back to the story. One day I get a call from the girl I had been dating for some time, and she tells me she wants to meet at a local coffee shop to have some coffee. Very evasive. Doesn't tell me why. So I meet up with her, and she breaks out all these pictures of a little boy who's about 4 or 5 years old and tells me that this is my child. So we decide to go next door to the local pub and have a few drinks. One thing leads to another, and she's trying to get me to have intimacy with her again. I forgot to mention that she's engaged at this time. So we ride around and talk the whole time she's trying to get me to find some place that we can go fool around. And I'm just not in the mood since I just found out I probably have a son and have a lot in my mind. So I decide to take her back to her car, but she's too intoxicated to drive, so I take her to her mom's. And as she gets out of my truck, she realizes she's lost her engagement ring, which she took off at some point in time in the night. We parted ways with me telling her we need to get a DNA test. So a few weeks go by. She's introduced me to her son. We go out a few times as a mini family, and then comes time for the DNA test. It comes back as 99.9% I am not the father. She tells me it has to be wrong, and she'll pay for another DNA test. So we went to have another DNA test, and as you can imagine, the results came back the same. That's what she breaks down to tell that she had intimacy with some loser guy she knew in high school that night I broke up with her, because no one had ever broken up with her before. It's been about 15 or 16 years now, and about 3 months ago I got an FBDM. Hey, I'm getting divorced, we should get together. I'll pass. Story 6. One of my former supervisors was from a Western African country, but had moved to Canada for studies or work. He had a wife back home. He'd go back and forth 2 times a year. She gets pregnant. Baby boy is born. Then during one of our shifts, the supervisor sees messages on his phone and excuses himself. Hours pass. I don't see him. Only us working, his desk next to mine, so I notice. Then he comes back to his desk. The morning staff comes in and he leaves, saying goodbye to me and speaking to our top boss before leaving. Resigns during the week. Returns to the company a few months later. No one knew what had happened, and rumor we heard was a family emergency. When I was splitting up with my daughter's mother, I found out about her unfaithfulness and decided to tell him. He made a plan for me to avoid the drama. Then told me his deal. His wife used to send him pictures of their son via text and email. She accidentally sent him pics that were meant for her BF that she took while the 2 of them were intimate together. Found out his baby boy wasn't his. Filed for divorce, dealt with the legal things, and came back. Story 7. Many years ago, I got a Subway sandwich and found the girl behind the counter was incredibly flirty with me. Later, it was as if she wanted to hurry up and do the thing. We did. I pulled out. At a later date, soon after, she gave me a protection to use so I didn't have to pull out. How ironic that it magically broke while I was in. Days later, she tells me she's pregnant. I stuck it out until when she was supposed to be 3 months pregnant, but looked 5 to 6 months. Then, surprisingly, not. She was having a premature delivery. The kid that came out was completely done cooking. Full head of hair, able to lift his head to look around with eyes wide open. She still stuck to her story that it was mine. We took a test and it wasn't mine. That woman knew what she was doing. This woman tried to ruin my life. I feel the need to know what kind of sandwich she ordered so I don't find myself in this predicament. Story 8. My ex-wife and I had been married for 6 years and we finally decided it was time to have a second baby. I work as a VP of sales for a popular restaurant chain and travel extensively as part of my job. After trying for a few months when I was home from traveling, she finally got pregnant. Things were going great, and our male Nigerian nanny, who helped out with my young daughter and my wife with chores around the house when I was traveling for work, was doing an amazing job. When the baby was born, it was immediately clear it was not mine. My wife and I are both white, and the baby was very dark. I walked out of the delivery room, shocked, left the hospital, drove aimlessly for a while, chain-smoking cigarettes, and finally checked into a hotel off the highway when it started getting dark. Turns out my Nigerian nanny impregnated my wife while I was away traveling for work. They had been sleeping together for years. We sold the house and got a divorce soon after, and share custody of her daughter. She got remarried to the nanny and they just bought a home together a few towns away. I live in an apartment near her daughter's school and started dating again recently. Hopefully he was at least a Nigerian prince and he got some cash. Story 9. My great-great-grandfather was a tall, lanky fellow with a long face. An absolute Gumby of a person. He was of British descent with somewhat dark coloring and very, very distinctive features. My great-grandmother was blatantly, blazingly Irish, pale and completely blanketed in freckles with a mischievous, dainty little nose, reaching a grand height of 5'3". Irish appearance isn't exactly evident, of course. Maybe great-great-grandpa had Irish heritage, or maybe she was British but just had a whole lot of freckles. But none of that odd-looking fellow's odd-looking features appeared. My great-grandmother's little sister was also tiny, not covered in freckles. Not as mischievous-looking, but she also had none of her father's features. Well, there's a good reason. Neither child was his, and he knew that. I was totally okay with that. Extremely happy about it, actually. See, my great-great-grandpa was injured during World War II, and apparently, that injury also rendered him unable to reproduce. He came home to Canada, and a few years later, he met a woman. A tiny, rough-edged wild child of a farm girl, a cook on a ranch with a shamelessly filthy mouth and a shameful, for rural Canada in 1920s, story. She was unmarried with a daughter, so she'd given birth after a fling with an Irishman. So, giant, serene great-great-grandpa married the 4'10" woman and adopted my great-grandmother as his own, and loved her immensely. A few years later, I guess they decided they wanted another child. IVF wasn't exactly an option in that time and place, so, apparently, they asked a neighbor to offer his services. Great-great-grandma had another baby girl, and he adopted that baby as his own and loved her immensely. A fantastic arrangement, practical and resulting in joy. He was a truly wonderful father and his children adored him. Our side of the family still haven't told the other sister's side of the family. Story 10. I almost was. At this point in my life, this story is one of the oddest things to happen to me while dating. I had exchanged messages with this one girl on a dating site who I then later added to social media. We'd flirt casually, but it didn't get further than that. No dates, no nothing. She and I were both East Indian. She made good money as a nurse, but still lived at home with her parents. She would date in the sly, though. She messaged me after a few months of limited conversations, saying she would totally hang out. I was working until 10 that night, so I told her I would get home by 10:30 and needed to change and freshen up, so I would be free at 11 p.m. She still wanted to hang out. When we met up, she drove me to this parking lot by a park, 20 minutes away from my place. She was overly flirty. A few hugs by her, compliments by her, huge smiles and kisses. She even asked me to smell her neck as she sprayed different perfumes on each side of herself, and then she suggested we go somewhere outside. I'm a grown man who has an apartment, so I told her we could just go back to my place and take it from there. She agreed, but she said she wanted to take me to this park. It's almost midnight, and take me by the hand to a super secluded bench in the park. She's all over me, and I legit pick her up in my arms and tell her I'll bring her back to my place. I put her down in her car, and her smiles turned to tears. She tells me I was one of the nicest guys she knows and was sorry. She was going to trap me. She spoke about how I had pictures with babies and my younger cousins all in my FB and knew I would take care of my kid. She had missed her period and confirmed she was pregnant from her doctor. She wanted to have intimacy with me and tell me I was the dad. Said her parents would disown her due to the pregnancy. The guy she was with had ghosted her. I didn't say anything, but sat her in the passenger seat of her car and went to drive myself home. About 10 minutes of her wiping tears, I asked her why she didn't just come over to my place. She tells me that is where her and the baby's dad would meet up. In the darkness, because we're both brown guys, it would be easier for her. I knew the closest transit station to where we were, drove there, got out, and said good luck with the baby. She messaged me a few months later to apologize. Delete off friends list. Story 11. I was married for 9 years. My wife started to go out with friends a bit more often than usual. She would leave me with the kids. She goes on a trip a few states away and comes back. 3 months passed. She is and was mistreating and controlling. I had a vasectomy. She was pregnant. She runs a campaign of terror on me. I have a psychotic break. She has me involuntarily committed to the psych ward. She tells me she's leaving a couple days later. 2 months pass. I'm released. I found out she has a boyfriend. There's no way the baby is mine. It is blonde. I have black hair, blue eyes, unique blue, shared with my children. His eyes are too far apart in comparison and a different blue. My children look and act like me. The kid looks completely different. I'm better now. My health is 100% physically good. My mental state is questionable some days. I have a loving girlfriend of 1.5 years. She has no children and likes mine. It worked out better than expected, but it has been a long, difficult road. Story 12. This is a different twist. I have refrained from sharing the story online. It wasn't my finest moment and worried about what people behind the keyboard would say to me, but to be honest, in real life, more people than I would like already know and judge me, so really what a bunch of strangers. A few years ago, I ended a mistreating relationship. The week I moved my stuff out, the schmuck put on his nice guy persona and played with my emotions, and stupidly I slept with him. Kind of as a goodbye, I guess. Moved into a new house later that week and an old friend helped out. I ended up christening my brand new bed in the heat of the moment. A strong hero helping a damsel in distress and actually listening to me and being a supporter made me continue my stupid decisions. A few weeks later, I found out I'm pregnant. Sick with constant nausea, stressed out, felt like I'd hit rock bottom. Told them both. I'm honest like that. Old friend got hella clingy and emotional, borderline stalkerish, and spent most of our conversations crying on me and needing me to comfort him, but offered me no comfort in return. Made me pull away and distance myself. Mistreating ex turned all hero, provided the support and comfort I needed. He took charge but refused to raise a kid if it wasn't his and wanted to know. In my weakest, he moved me out of my new refuge and back into his house. Despite the threat, I'd pretty much be in a huge mess if it wasn't his. Guess I was slightly delusional and convinced myself it was his. He pampered me like never before. He put on an amazing act. He ordered a high-tech DNA test from the States that tests the baby's DNA via my samples and tests it against the man's sample to see if they match. Cost him nearly $2,000 and took far longer for the results than hoped. The day after my birthday, we found out there weren't a match. I was already back in his hold. If I didn't do what he wanted, I would be out in the streets homeless, penniless, and pregnant. So I had 13 weeks, 5 days. He drove me 2 hours away to the nearest clinic and made sure I went in and through with it. He instantly dropped his act and became worse than he was before. He loved to rub it in my face and taunt me and use it as leverage for even more control. The whole ordeal broke me completely, and 1 year later I left for good. I've struggled with what happened. I've gone through depression, anger, regret, and what-ifs in an endless cycle. The pain and shame and anger will always be there, but either I'm becoming numb and used to it, or it's fading as I heal in a happier life. The real father doesn't know about the test and the whole horrible story. I know it would break him. He's more mentally fragile than I thought, and I care about him, even though we're no longer friends. So that's my story of the trashiest moment in my life. Please don't be too harsh. Yeah, you got this. Anyways, if you're enjoying the video, don't forget to hit that subscribe and like button for more videos like this. Story 13. Not my significant other, but I have an uncle who has been teased his whole life for the way he looks and has struggled to get a girlfriend. This caused him to feel depressed at times, but he still knuckled down and worked hard and now owns a landscaping business and makes good money. About 1 year ago, he brought this girl to our family event, introducing her as his girlfriend, and spent the night telling everyone how in love they are. She's gorgeous, so everyone is impressed and happy he found love, but a lot of people start to comment that she seems to be uninterested in him, but we chalk it up to her being shy around the big family. They very quickly move in together, and she very quickly gets used to spending his money. We start to suspect she's in it for the money, but he won't listen to that, so no one knows what to do. About 2 months into their relationship, she says she's pregnant. We're all happy for him, as he always wanted to be a father. About 6 months into the pregnancy, his sister, who works at a hotel, says she saw her there with some black guy she didn't recognize. Again, my uncle refuses to believe that. We figured maybe she saw someone who looked similar and stopped pressing it. A month ago, she had their son. She's white with blonde brown hair. He's mixed race, so very light brown skin with medium brown hair. They both have blue eyes. The son is very dark-skinned with black hair and brown eyes. But he still says we're bullying his girlfriend. Many family members have begged to get a DNA test, but he refuses and is insulted to be asked. What can you do, man? Story 14. Not me, my fiancé. His piece of a trash ex got pregnant, so he'd stay with her. His son does not look like him. His son has dark hair and tan olive skin. My fiancé is pretty light-skinned, and a lot of his features just look nothing like his either, so it's pretty clear that they aren't related. She was able to pull it off for 2 years though, because he kind of looks like her. She finally fessed up when his son was 2 years old, but at that point she already wasn't taking care of him and ultimately lost custody. He's always loved him as his own despite not actually being related. And his biological dad, not his real dad, because that is 100% my fiancé, has never been in his life. Although I believe he lives in our town, not sure. No one talks about it much. Fast forward to today. He's in middle school and his mother is not in his life at all and never really has been despite the fact she lives in the same town as us. My fiancé and his mother, son's grandmother, have raised him completely. She just got out of prison recently for the second or third time in his life. This time for robbery. She said she had nothing to do with it though. Sure, Jan. He reaches out via the phone but he has no desire to see her. They just barely know each other, so I think it's awkward and painful for him. He's a huge brat and has issues. ADHD, went to an alternative school because he wasn't going to school, was on probation but just got off. But it's hard not to love and care for him because of the fact his mom is such a piece of trash. He knows my fiancé isn't his biological son now, but doesn't like to talk about it. He found out because he read some texts between his mom and his grandma. I try to be the best soon-to-be stepmom I can be, and guide him to make good decisions. He shows interest in college, and I really hope he becomes the best man he can be, despite some circumstances. I'm pregnant with my first child, a son, so I hope he'll be a good big brother too. Story 15. Sorta opposite. My mother married her high school sweetheart, and they were awful together. It was mistreating and they really shouldn't have been together, but young and dumb, I guess. As that's falling apart, my mother leaves and cheats on her husband with this other guy for 2 or 3 months. May or may not have been hiding a substance misuse and was pregnant. It was pretty clear to most people in the know that the child would be from the new guy, not the husband. Timing, etc. You learned about reproduction. Being that things were already in a nosedive, it just got worse. They argued constantly. Once my brother was born, it was tripled. The family was so sure that the new guy was the father, but the baby looked so much like the husband that he was convinced that this was his child. He tried to take his son and run away, and she would keep my brother to her at night to make sure she'd wake up if he tried. When she filed for divorce, a paternity test was done and confirmed that he wasn't the father, but the new guy was. The judge deemed, rightfully, that he had no authority over this kid and he's an ex-husband now. Divorce was finalized. Mother eventually lived with the new guy for some years. They eventually broke up, and due to other reasons, the new guy passed away. He was good at being a fun dad. It's not over though. Since my brother was born while my mother was still married, he'd had this guy's name. Apparently it was deemed unnecessary to change it at the time. Laziness? I don't know. It was in my brother's late teens that he started the process of changing his last name to match her mother's maiden name. This apparently stirred up some emotion, and my mother felt that, after some decades, maybe he chilled out. She had many life changes, gone through rehab for her problem, changed where she lived, gone back to school. Let's call the ex and say hi. This led down a long road. My brother hasn't always been the sharpest. I won't lie, there was plenty of unfair teasing over stupid things said, but I don't know that I'd seen anyone use it against him. They started hanging out. My brother and mother were close, so when the option arose for the ex-husband to see what the baby looked like now, of course they all went and had lunch. My brother then started talking with the ex one-on-one, not just through her mother. They would go out together and my brother met some of the ex-husband's family, got a tattoo from one of them even. The ex started putting this doubt in my brother's mind about who he was and who he was related to, who his father was. Since our father passed away years before, long story, new guy wasn't even my father but out trying to write a novel yet, and an uncle passed not long after. My brother wanted a dad, an uncle, a grandpa, someone, so he started to doubt. Eventually he confessed that he wasn't sure who to believe, and went and found the old paternity test and wrote a letter with the help of a lawyer to the ex-husband to knock it off. He was clearly trying to take advantage of my brother. Whether he himself believed that it was his kid or what, I don't know. Story 16. The man who was my great-grandmother's husband was incapable of reproducing, but didn't want anyone to know, so he encouraged my great-grandmother to sleep around. Eventually, this resulted in 3 daughters, all with different fathers. This was in northern Finland in the 30s. My grandmother was the middle daughter. According to all reports, my great-grandmother's husband was a schmuck. My bio-great-grandfather was reportedly the love of her life, but they didn't reconnect for decades until they both ended up in the same retirement home. My aunt has an adorable picture of them getting married in their wheelchairs at the age of 79 and 81 respectively. Continuing the tradition, my grandmother, who is very mentally unstable, likely cheated on my grandfather and conceived a son. We found pictures of her at a nearby vacation destination, with a caption, place name, I got pregnant, on the back in her handwriting. My grandfather still wanted to raise the child, but she freaked out on him and disappeared for months. He later learned that she had fled halfway across the province and hidden in a home for unwed mothers and gave the boy up for adoption. My mom searched for her brother for years but wasn't able to find him before she died. I kinda hope he'll pop up in 23andMe, so my aunt will have a sibling again. If you know any man who was born in Burnaby, British Columbia in 1958 and adopted into a Dutch-Canadian family, that might be my half-uncle. Story 17. My mother told me that my father's father, my grandfather, was not his biological father. Still, he took him like he was his son. Years later, he found out that my grandmother cheated on his father with another man, and that he's the real father. Dad was really upset with her mother, so my mother tried to talk him out to forgive her. However, he didn't want to establish a relationship with his real father. My biological grandfather passed away before I got to know him. Mom even told me what he used to do and his first name. However, he didn't want me to know. Probably because he thought I would judge her. She messed up badly, but it wasn't my place to hold a grudge with her. Who knows what other family members I had out there that I didn't know. Still, it's better that I remain with a mystery. In the end, he really told me about it. He told me that he still didn't recognize him as his father, even though he's probably the biological one. That was a long time ago. He was young, too. He told me he attempted to give money to him, only to my dad to let him know he can take care of himself. Story 18. Not me, but my husband. He lost his V-card, then 2 weeks later, the girl claimed she was pregnant with his child. After measuring the unborn child, the doctor changed her original due date to a month earlier, which means her conception day was a month earlier. She still swore she hadn't been with anyone else for months before him, and him being in love and naive, he actually believed her. They even named the baby after him. As a newborn, he could pass for his kid, and I honestly thought the kid was his back then. We had a mutual friend. We started dating when the kid was a toddler. Looked absolutely nothing like him. Her friends started telling him things, that she would ask them if her son looked like different guys she has been with, that she had been cheating on him. So he finally bought a DNA test kit and found out the obvious truth. He was devastated, to say the least. Ugly crying, depression, etc. He continued to take care of him, but stopped paying child support. Kid is in primary school now, and we still have him every weekend. Story 19. Not me, but my sister. Flashback to about 11 years ago. She's a lot older than me because parents decided to have another kid 30 years after they had 2. Anyways, she had 3 kids and a husband, and she went to El Salvador for school since she's a geologist. She contracted a parasite and it led to her in a hospital getting surgery after surgery. Anyways, she met another patient in a room close to her, and one thing leads to another and she's out of the hospital, and pregnant. Her now ex-husband wasn't suspicious because they hadn't seen each other in ages and were very happy to see each other. However, the baby was born with hair redder than the devil, which made no sense since both my sister and her husband had jet black hair. This immediately ruined literally everything and sent my sister through years of guilt and depression. Time has healed most wounds, and her husband is surprisingly dealing with it better than anyone thought. He even takes him when all the other kids go to stay with him. Somewhat happy ending, but I'm happy that my sister is doing heaps better. I saw her last summer for the first time in 7 years. Our family is really spread out, and I was super happy to see that she's doing well. Story 20. Opposite of this, my significant other's ex-wife is black. He's white. When their son was born, he was quite pale, blonde, and had green eyes. Obviously, there was no cheating. My significant other's German genes are just strong. He told me the doctor made a comment to the effect of, "Oh, he's really white," about the baby. Significant other's ex made angry eyes, and the doc muttered an apology. His son turns 5 tomorrow, still super white, blonde, and green-eyed. Only giveaway is his nose and the curls. He's a gorgeous, sweet little kid, and I love him. Story 21. Was in a long-distance relationship with a girl in college. After going 2 months without a period, she took a pregnancy test, which turned up positive. After informing me, I had to keep myself from panicking. I hate kids, and didn't work in college to avoid burning out. While she refused a cancellation, she agreed to adopt out the baby when it was born. A week goes by and I get a massive wall of text from her in Skype that basically boils down to, "I'm leaving you. The kid is not yours as my ex and I had a ton of unprotected intimacy, and the doctor confirmed that the date of conception isn't when you and I were together. I'm not sure why you didn't realize this already, but I'm sorry for everything. It's a weird mix of feelings to both go, yay, I'm not a dad, and oh my god, the girl I intended on marrying is pregnant with her ex's child. Story 22. Not mine, but a work story. 911 call for labor. Very upper class neighborhood. Token sorority girl, now 25-ish. Husband is very excited. Wants to ride with her to the hospital. He sits in front, policy. 2 medics in back with tailboard from the engine driving. Wife delivers on the way. Black baby. Medic asked in the most professional way they could if this was expected, trying to judge what they were in for at the hospital with a husband. Wife burst into tears. Medic radios ahead to ER with code for PD assist. They said you could feel the guy driving let off the gas when he heard it. Dad was still super excited. One guy was positioned to where he couldn't see to the back. Arrive at the ER, they try to hurry the husband to the entrance before mom and baby were brought out. Didn't quite get dad inside. He knows something is up and I'm sure worried about mom or baby health. At some point he comes back toward the stretcher, moving toward the ER entrance, catches sight of the baby and absolutely loses his mind. They said he used all the regular insults and a few words that they were pretty sure he made up. Before PD got control of him, he threw both his shoes at her. Said you could see either spit or tears spraying out from under the lights. Feel bad for the guy. Sounds like this kind of thing happens often enough that the ambulance crew knows how to handle it. Story 23. Not exactly the same, but when I was pregnant with my daughter, my husband was still active duty in Army, and we obviously had a doctor on post. I casually mentioned in one of my first appointments that I was O negative and my husband is O positive, so regardless, I'll need the Rogaine injection. She gave me a look and I was like, I know I need one regardless of what dad is, but for the record, he's O+. And this woman looks me straight in the eye and goes, we don't care about dad here. You wives always lie anyways. I almost passed out from laughing. My husband was furious. Base medical stuff are pretty big schmucks sometimes. My father had the snip. 18 months later, my stepmom started spewing like a fire hose. She had HG for all her pregnancies. Her and dad go to the base GP for a double appointment. She needs early pregnancy samples. He needs an analysis. The doctor told her to just come clean then and there, save her the embarrassment of the negative count. My father had to hold stepmom back so she wouldn't knock the doctor. Unsurprisingly, the sample came back showing active swimmers and my father had to go back and get a second vasectomy. It's one extreme or another with base medical, I feel. I get why she said it, but really? Out of all the couples who were together when he was in, there's us and one other left. They all ended because the wives cheated, and in far too many cases, the wives tell me like I'm not going to tell my guys. I've known these boys for close to a decade. They're my priority, not some random person they pick up. Story 24. Not me, but mine and my husband's friend. For privacy reasons, I'll call him Howard and his wife Katie. Before he got married to her, he confided in my husband how he found out Katie cheated on him. Despite all his venting and confessions, he still ended up marrying Kate. 1 year later, she was pregnant and we both doubted it was Howard's, but they both seemed happy, so we were happy for them. The baby girl was born, and since both parents are white and the baby is white, no one thought anything of it. Howard raised the baby girl with so much love. When the baby was a toddler, Howard found out Katie cheated on him again. We lost count how many times. He started questioning the truth about their daughter. He got a paternity test, and he was not the father. He confronted Katie by asking, "Tell me the truth. Is baby girl mine?" And she said, "Of course." And then he dropped the paternity results in front of her and got a divorce. He got his name changed in the birth certificate and doesn't want to pay anything. He's still in contact with his ex-wife. I guess they're still friendly, but he doesn't want anything to do with a baby girl. I have a daughter of my own. I cannot imagine raising a baby from day one, then finding out it wasn't yours. It's such a heartbreaking story. Story 25. I had a car accident and I could no longer drive to her place. I was honestly ready to move on some months later without really making an effort. She dropped it on me that she was pregnant after months of not seeing it talking. I listened and I told her I would need to know when to take off work. When she gave me the due date, I instantly used Nagel's rule to tell her that the date of conception was after my car accident. She really tried hard to convince me, so I told her I would pay for a DNA test. She declined. She admitted to sleeping with someone else. I wasn't even really mad. I didn't care enough to even try to maintain a relationship due to a car accident, so who am I to tell her she can't sleep with someone else? I've gone to see her a few times since, while her family is around. I suspect she prefers saying I'm the dad over the other guy. I feel bad she put herself in a bad spot, but I'm also very happy to have dodged that bullet. Story 26. I have no clue if the man had been calling dad as my birth father. My dad denied me and my oldest sister. 6 years before I was born, my dad had a child with some lowlife. He didn't acknowledge my sister until she was a toddler, finally getting a paternity test. She is his. My dad also had another child and my oldest sister was 2. He didn't deny her. I was born 4 years later and he denied I was his, but stayed with my mother until I was a toddler. I still visited him on weekends and they went to court for split custody. All my life, I heard that my dad believed I was my mother's best friend's child. It didn't help when the man's sister spread it around town that I was also her brother's kid. Anyway, one day I joked with my mom and I said, "I'll get a paternity test to prove it." She looked me straight in the eyes and said, "No, seriously, don't." So I actually have no clue, but I had suspicion. By the way, my dad, ginger, green eyes, pale. My mom, brown hair, olive skin, hazel eyes. Me, brown hair, olive skin, hazel eyes. Suspected affair, brown hair, brown eyes, fair skin. So I don't know whose child I am since I look just like my mom. Well, if you like these stories, here's more. YouTube thinks you're going to love this. Catch you in that video.